Piet was a fourth grade student in an elementary school in Amsterdam. One day, a pleasant Mrs. Van Dijk came as a substitute for Mr. Jacobus van den Berg, a gloomy, perpetually angry and intimidating art teacher. It was the very end of the school year, only a couple of weeks left before the holidays, but to the joy of most students, he had retired. The new teacher came from Helmond. She was plump, with short ginger hair. She laughed out loud and reminded her students of an aunt from the country more than a school teacher. However, it seems that only the students liked her. During those few weeks, other teachers seemed to somehow look down on her and acted as if she wasn't at their level. But she didn't seem to mind. "I'm unlevelled by nature," she would say, patting her big belly and laughing out loud at her own expense. The first art class with the new teacher was quite unusual for Piet and the other children. Strict Vandenberg would pace between rows of desks, ever so displeased, and comment, "Magda, those proportions are not good at all. Reuben, what kind of shadows do you call these?" Or, "Hans, where did you get the idea that an owl has eyes that big?" He would let out a loud sigh and then huff through his nose. He was one nose ring and steam coming out of his nostrils short of looking in every respect like a raging bull. Then he would get to Piet's desk, where the boy would sit, unable to draw a single line, fearing he might make a mistake. In front of him would always sit a completely blank paper. "Piet, you will get an F again and tell your mother to come to school tomorrow." Piet would work on his assignment all night long. There would be yelling and chiding, sometimes even punishment. At any rate, the boy never got a mark higher than a D. Mrs. Van Dijk, however, came to her first class smiling. "Hello, children. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Tessa Van Dijk." Then she lifted her skirt slightly, hopping 3 steps to the right, 3 steps to the left, whirled with her hands up in the air, and ended with a deep bow. She stomped her feet 2 more times. If the silence has a sound, believe me, it was the loudest at that moment. The teacher lifted her head swiftly, and her eyes flew over bewildered children's faces. They sat in the chairs, wondering in awe what had just happened. "Now I ask you to introduce yourselves and dance your favourite dance. Shyness will not be allowed, although just so you know, it wasn't exactly easy for me either." She smiled gently. "Let's go, one by one. If you're impatient, you can begin immediately." It turned out that Magna was the bravest. She sang her name, squatted, extended one leg, then the other, and repeated this several times. In the end, she victoriously raised her hand up in the air. One by one, children took their turns, laughing, dancing, shrilling with delight, and having the best art class in their lives. Piet mustered up courage too. He took a step to the right, step to the left, ran, jumped high up, and cried out, "Hooray!" Golly, he felt good. And when the last student had introduced himself, the teacher spoke to them brightly. "Now that we have met each other, we can start with art. I have a surprise for you. An announcement has come to the school. Our town has organised an art competition for 4th graders. The topic is free, and the main prize is a weekend in Disneyland. Let your imagination run free. Forget all the rules, and you have a chance to fly. Let trees walk. Let buildings smile. Put a blue whale on a bench in front of the school and put me next to it so I'll look thin in comparison." She laughed again. "Or just draw whatever it is that you long for. In art, anything goes. So start." Piet sat and wondered. This Mrs. Dijk won't reproach him because of the proportions, colours, or whatever he paints. so he might as well draw a line. What the boy had longed for every day, and what his dad never made for him, was a treehouse. Dad would promise year after year, every summer, but his 10th birthday came and went, and he still didn't get his treehouse. He didn't want some small and ugly house where only he could fit, but a large one, with 2 rooms and ladders resting on the tree, with real windows. So Piet began, move by move, colour by colour, brush by brush. What came to life before his eyes, he himself didn't expect. Piet painted the whole house in the shape of a tree. Instead of the branches and leaves, this tree had a cube with rooms which stood askew. The very corner of the cube rested on a pillar that stood firmly as a tree trunk, and carved in it was the thing that no house with an upper floor could do without: a staircase. At the end of the class, the artwork was signed, collected, and given to Mrs. Van Dijk. There were pink elephants, aliens, smiling tigers, all kinds of fantasies, and of course, Piet's house. The teacher was pleased, and she viewed the artwork one by one. She gave a lot of A's, and Piet got an A+. She put everything in one big envelope and sent it all together to the competition. All that was left to do now was to wait. A few days later, news came to the school that at the head of the competition committee was none other than their teacher, Jacobus Vandenberg. Children dreaded the very thought of the abominable teacher will see their work. But Mrs. Van Dijk cheered them. "Don't you worry about a thing. Who wouldn't like to see pink elephants?" But she didn't know their horrifying teacher. Results came in the last week of school, just before the holidays. The teacher gave the unopened envelope to Magna to read out loud. Everyone hoped that someone in their class won the trip to Disneyland. The girl opened the envelope, took out the paper, and started reading. A girl from another school had won the prize. A girl no one knew. Her name was Kristen Van Rijn. The explanation said that she painted an excellent genre scene with precise drawing, carefully deliberated colours, and blah blah blah. All kinds of things were said in the letter, and no one understood anything except that Kristen Van Rijn is going to Disneyland. And that was all that mattered. However, there were a couple more sentences at the end of the letter. Teacher Vandenberg seemed to have decided to give Piet one more scare. It said, "The worst of all entries was the one by Piet Bloom. He painted a stupid-looking house, all crooked. No one could possibly even walk in. The house resembles a tree or a cube or some such hogwash. Work this clumsy is yet to be seen in Amsterdam. We ask Piet Bloom never to apply to an art competition again." Even a grown-up wouldn't take these words lightly, and needless to say, Piet was shook and embarrassed to the core. If only I hadn't even drawn anything, he thought, wanting to run from the classroom and the school, just go home and not be seen for many days. What Piet didn't know then was that he would be evaluated by his inferiors many more times in his life. If we were to up and run every time, we simply wouldn't get anywhere. The teacher tried to comfort him, and so did his friends, but he was simply sad. So sad. So the school year came and went. Holidays began. Miss Tessa Van Dijk went back to Helmond. She did promise, though, that she would come back the following year to teach them. She was just going to spend her summer holidays there. Days went by. Piet was slowly recovering from the cruel words of Mr. Vandenberg, and bit by bit started to paint again. Tulip bulbs, windmills, forests. Then one day he received a letter addressed to him. It said, "For Piet Bloom, a great artist." Who is joking with me? Thought the boy, and opened the envelope with great curiosity. In front of a real tree-shaped house exactly like the one he once drew, stood a smiling Mrs. Tessa van Dijk. Her left hand was on her hip, and she was pointing to the house with her right. Although she was both feet and clogs on the ground, it looked as though she was going to hop with excitement at any moment. A real house, square-shaped, on a pillar made of concrete, bricks and glass, with an upper floor, amazing, magical, exactly as Piet had imagined it, rose next to her. In the lower corner of the photograph, it had said, "In front of my new house in Helmond. See you soon, Teacher Tessa." Piet looked at the photo in his hands for a few moments more. He then took one step right, one step left, ran, jumped high and shouted, "Hooray!" The only thing the hero of our story, Piet, and Dutch architect Piet Bloem have in common is that they were both fourth graders at some point in their lives, and that they almost certainly love tree houses. Mr. Jacobus van den Berg and Mrs. Tessa van Dijk are almost certainly imaginary. It is, however, sure that there will always be teachers like them, just as there will always be children like Piet, children full of imagination, daring and unusual. Architect Piet Bloem built houses in Helmond and Rotterdam in the Netherlands, a bit different from those most of us live in today. Should the road take you there, please let us know how you like them.